Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and present my 13 colonies assignment presentation. Um, yeah, the first one is New England. Of the original 13 colonies, New England was made up of Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island. Colonists settled in New England in order to escape religious persecution from the Church of England during a period of turmoil. The economy was built on the foundation of fur, which was mainly beaver fur, lumber, and selling fish. The colonists worked as fishermen, hunters, and subsistence farmers. The dominant religion was Christianity, specifically the Puritans, who believed in the ideas of Calvinism and predestination. Slavery did exist in New England, although it was not as extensive as it was in the South. Slave owners only had a few slaves rather than enough to run an entire plantation. Relations with the natives were decent at first. Trading often took place. However, relations declined as colonists set their sights on acquiring more land. There was not a whole lot of cultural diversity in New England. Most colonists were English speaking European, and from countries like England, Scotland, and Ireland, and most of them were Puritans. The governments established were typically a democratically elected group of representatives or an individual representative. These elections were tied into religion very heavily. Some of the other northern colonies, such as Maine and New Hampshire, were governed by the Massachusetts Bay Colony for a period of time. An interesting fact about New England is that due to the poor soil, farming was not a reliable means of building an economy like it was in the middle colonies and in the southern colonies. This is why the economy of New England was built on fur, fish, and lumber for the most part. Two important figures, William Bradford. He was a respected member of the Plymouth colony and became the first governor of Plymouth and all of New England at that time, and was elected 30 times in the yearly elections. He became weary of non-Puritan colonies popping up in the area and feared that they would end up corrupting the Puritans. Roger Williams. He was forced out of the Massachusetts Bay Colony for his radical ideas and founded Rhode Island. He encouraged compensating the natives for their land and believed in true religious freedom. Now we're moving on to the middle colonies. Of the original 13 colonies, the middle colonies were made up of New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and New York. Colonists settled in order to have true religious freedom. The economy was partially built on farming since the soil was very fertile. The economy also heavily relied upon some of the bigger cities for their trading and distribution. Colonists worked as merchants and farmers. There wasn't one single dominant religion. The middle colonies were very diverse in their religion. Some were Lutherans, Calvinists, Presbyterians, and more. Slavery also existed in the middle colonies. Again, it was not as prevalent as it was in the southern colonies. It never actually became a major player in the economy, and it was mainly just used for additional labor. Relations with the Native Americans were pretty good. For example, in Pennsylvania, it was insisted that natives be paid for their land rather than have it stolen from them, which is part of the reason that relations were good early on. The middle colonies were extremely diverse in culture. There were English, Germans, French, Swedes, and Scot-Irish that all settled there. There were also a vast mix of religions. The governments established in the middle colonies were kind of strange. They had people assigned by England to rule over the colonies, or they were directly ruled by England. Um, in New York, for example, the governor was chosen by the king himself. However, the legislature was elected by the colonies, and there was also a court system. An interesting fact about the middle colonies is that they produced a lot of iron ore goods, which is one of the things that they would export back to England. Two important figures in the middle colonies. One of them was William Penn. William Penn was the founder of the Pennsylvania colony, and he was the one who envisioned that the colony would have true religious freedom and treat the natives with respect. Peter Minute, I believe is how you say that. Peter Minute established the Delaware colony. However, it was eventually taken over by the British. And an interesting thing about that is I think it was a duke showed up with like a navy, and the Delaware colony, which at the time was the New Netherland colony, I believe, just immediately surrendered. So that's kind of interesting. And now we're moving on to the southern colonies. Of the original 13 colonies, the southern colonies were made up of Maryland, Virginia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia. Colonists settled in order to mainly obtain wealth. For example, many came over to the southern colonies with the expectation that they would get really rich off of gold, and it would be a really easy life for them, and that they'd be able to set up a house on a plot of land really easily. The economy was pretty much entirely built on farming at first. Tobacco and cotton were two particularly valuable crops. Slavery eventually became a significant part of the southern economy. To a certain extent, it became the backbone of the southern colonies' economy. Colonists worked as farmers and slave traders mostly. The main religion was with the Church of England, or the Anglicans, since these churches were given tax money through the state. There were some other denominations, though, such as Baptists and Catholics. Slavery existed big time in the southern colonies. As I stated before, it became a very large part of the southern colonies' economy. Um, Relations with the natives in the south were not the best. The southern colonies grew very rapidly, and some colonists even captured and sold Native Americans into slavery, as slavery became a more common means to acquire money. This caused relations with the natives in the southern colonies to quickly decline. The southern colonies were not incredibly diverse. It consisted of mostly wealthy landowners, slaves, and indentured servants. There were some individuals who weren't as wealthy, though. The governments established in the southern colonies had a governor who was appointed by the English sponsor, um, sponsored for the settlement to start. They also had a legislative body that was used to represent the people. An interesting fact about the southern colonies is that it began as a single settlement called Jamestown. However, there was an attempted settlement on Roanoke Island, which failed due to a lack of supplies and sudden disappearance of all the colonists. Two important figures in the southern colonies: John Smith. John Smith was the first governor of the first permanent English settlement in the New World. He was extremely important in the development and survival of the settlement. James Oglethorpe. James Oglethorpe founded the last of the original 13 colonies, Georgia, in 1733. He was a relatively forward-thinking individual, banning alcohol and slavery. He wanted to create a colony where the quote-unquote worthy poor would be given a second chance. And here are all of my sources. So yeah.